So I guess like journalism is the antithesis to capitalism, just because you can't endlessly grow it. It's not like...
Yeah, you can't endlessly grow fact checking efficiency. Like you can increase it to a certain point, but at a certain point it is literally a human being who is going over things line by line, and that is time consuming, and time is expensive in terms of labor.
Welcome to Beyond the Beat, a podcast by Chain Story, the agency to elevate your status in crypto. I'm your host, Pedro, and every week I'll be talking to the people in crypto media. We'll be telling their stories, their failures, their lessons, and whatever tips or tricks they've got up their sleeves.
Just, I know that you know a little bit about the podcast, but
Yeah.
I'm not one for like introducing. I've always found it bizarre when like you hear another person like list off all your achievements or all this stuff. So I go for like a straight your name.
Oh, cool.
And thank you for coming. And then
By the way, my name is pronounced Leigh Cuen.
okay,
I
yeah,
know that's like a weird spelling, so I always help people with that.
perfect. So yeah, Leigh Cuen,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't let's get the ball rolling, I suppose, if you want to tell us a little bit about your story pre-crypto and what made you decide, or what was so interesting about it that you decided not just to get into crypto, but get into it as a journalist?
Yeah. So my first journalism job, I was 15. I'm 34 right now, so it's been a while.
Yeah.
At a print newspaper. I was a journalist long before I knew anything about Bitcoin. I was working in the Middle East in particular, when specializing in darknet markets and different kinds of niche communities when I first heard about Bitcoin. And I was not smart enough to have anyone to bring it to my editors. My editors brought it to me. They were like, we want you to include this in some of your articles that are related to niche internet communities. And what kept me in crypto was, first off, I found the idea of fascinating. I found the people who were using it in different ways absolutely fascinating. But second off, I loved the way that my articles would have a direct impact on my readers. Before I was full-time crypto, I covered, for example, Trump's 2016 election. I did a lot of reporting in the Middle East, like I said, mostly covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I wrote about the sex industry, and I had a lot of different beats. And it can be really exhausting, emotionally exhausting, when you're writing about politics all the time, and it feels sometimes bigger than you can have an impact on. When you're writing about Bitcoin, I've had people tell me that they didn't lose their life savings because they read my article. I've had people tell me that their company was able to raise money, or I had activists tell me that they've been able to raise money based on my article. I've had people who were not doing such good things actually have consequences come to them, in part because of the reporting I was doing. Articles in this industry can move markets, and what's a huge responsibility also as a writer, you finally feel like you're connecting with your readers in a way that's impactful to them. Very different than when you're covering politics and all everyone does is yell at you. People yell at you in crypto too.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But at least enduring that, you also have people who tell you about the positive things that happen in their lives. And I think being able to connect with my readers and hear how having more control over their finances was having a positive impact on their life is what made me stay.
Interesting. Were there any stories in politics that you did feel that you had an impact, or something that swayed?
Yeah, sure. Totally. So, for example, I wrote about a program in Afghanistan that was going to get cut from international aid budgets, and it was particularly to help women's education. And magically, after my story appeared, the budget reappeared. So there's definitely times in politics when you're writing about something and you do have an impact. But, I mean, every single article you're doing in the crypto industry, somebody out there is reading about it for the first time. For somebody, this information is blowing their mind. So like, for better or worse, I think that means that you take each story like with a lot greater sense of responsibility and excitement. Like, okay, who is this going to impact? I don't know. Will I hear from them? Don't hear from them every time, but quite frequently, actually.
What made you want to become a journalist? Was it that idea of like having an impact? Maybe it was just like writing about interesting stories, or
I've always loved books and reading and magazines, and I really liked the idea of being a part of the publishing industry. And for journalism in particular, you're writing about what's going on right now, things that can be changed. So I think that's a particularly intriguing aspect of it.
Did you ever think, because now you're an editor,
Yeah.
when you got into journalism, was becoming an editor always your goal, or did you think of yourself always as somebody who is just going to be hands-on, like in the field, writing or reporting or researching?
I think most people who want to make their careers as journalists know that someday they might want to take an editor role. That doesn't mean that they'll have to, but it's just a natural career progression. There are definitely a lot of people who spend their entire careers as reporters, but those people make a choice, and there is a certain point at which they decide, like, do I become an editor or do I stay as a reporter? So it was never something that like I aspired to as being better than a reporter. I think they're both equal in terms of the value that they bring. But particularly for this time in my life, I think being an editor is a much better fit.
What do you miss from being a journalist?
I miss learning. As an editor, you spend a lot more time teaching, and teaching is definitely a way to learn. But I think as a reporter, you learn more.
Right. And I've always wondered about this. Do you think that being because I've only been a journalist for a few years now, like I've been covering crypto and I've been talking about it and studying it, but like actual journalistic or reporting has only been for a few years. And I've always wondered like the idea of being a generalist in the beginning or a niche in the beginning. Like for those early day reporters or journalists, do you have any tips or things that you wish you had picked up on or that you did pick up on back in the day and that, that you wish you had known or anybody or maybe something that somebody told you that really stuck?
Oh, there's so many things people have told me that really stuck. The one thing I'm going to tell you that just, if there's anything you take away from this, it's this: you cannot edit a blank page. Like, you have to get started. In terms of whether or not being a journalist or being a specialist, something that I've learned throughout my career, because I had so many different beats. I started out in print media, covering niche communities like local events, local news, local politics. Then I started doing international politics and traveled a lot. Then, like I mentioned, came back and did some national, did some culture reporting as well. I've done food, I've done travel. Really, I've done it all. And I used to think that like you have to do one thing and be the best at it. And that's in a way true. But also I found that like I'm a better reporter in crypto because I have this politics experience, because I have the experience I had reporting on the sex industry. Like every time you take on a new beat, it actually makes you better at the thing you do next. So it's okay to rack up multiple things and, keep your skills fresh in those things, but also to grow. You don't have to feel like, okay, well, I'm doing crypto, so I'm stuck in crypto for the next decade. Like, okay, focus on crypto, continue doing crypto, but can you do crypto and something else? Because those two irons will sharpen the other iron.
Yeah, I remember we spoke. It was last year, I think towards the end of last year, that you proposed and you're like, maybe you should think about finding some additional work outside of crypto. And I didn't heed your advice. But I kept on. But I do think it makes sense to like sprinkle on things from all sorts of different industries and beats. And do you want to share a little bit more about how it was like covering the sex industry? Because it's such it's so taboo. Yeah. Unfortunately, and ridiculousness. Yeah. But how was that experience? And
for sure. Yeah. So I will actually say that a lot of the early articles I did about the crypto industry came from the sources I had made in the sex industry, because a lot of sex workers do use Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So that's when, maybe if you do other things eventually, you'll find that, these are people who also use crypto, and like, how do I understand their particular use cases? When it came to just covering the sex industry in general, I had an amazing editor at the time. Her name is EJ Dixon, and she worked right now at Rolling Stone. And she really taught me to treat my subjects with great respect. And it's not that I was ever disrespecting my subjects, but it was something she emphasized with me so much, because these are a group of people that are so often disrespected. She was very adamant about the way I treated them. And that's something that just has learned, that I've learned that has applied to everything else in life. When you approach your subject, even if you disagree with them, even if you think that your life choices would have been different, if you approach them with great respect and trying to understand their perspective, the benefits to that process in your interview are tenfold.
do you think that they also feel that way? I mean, obviously they do, but would you say that journalists, when they approach the sex industry in general, are they usually much more confrontational or far removed, or?
I think they ask questions that would be first off inappropriate without like prefacing it like, I'm going to ask about your personal sex life, as opposed to like your performance or your clients or anything that you'd be talking. You're talking to a business person. You know, you don't go up to a urologist and ask him about his penis. Unless you say, like, can I ask you about your penis? Like, you know, you need to treat him with the dignity as like he is a person standing in front of you. And the other thing is, like, for example, something I found is I would always ask them about like health insurance or saving for their kids' college fund or saving for their own retirement or safety and things that were like aspects of their job, like workplace. And when I did that, I found first off that a lot of them use cryptocurrency, but other things that like never would have occurred to me to start investigating. So thinking about like, okay, this is a person who is doing a job or is having a hobby or like whatever it is they're doing, and how do I treat that the same as I would any other person's job or any other person's hobby?
Do you think that as journalists in general, like crypto and sex industry and I don't know, pharmaceuticals, whatever it is, politics, do a good job of sort of like respecting sources? I often get asked, for example, like friends of mine who say to me like, this is off the record, right? Yeah. And for me, every conversation is off the record unless I explicitly say I'm working on a story, like this is going to be on the record if you're okay with me being on the record.
Because you are using classic journalism ethics. That is the way it goes.
Yeah, but I feel like it's like so many people are surprised by it. It's like, what do you mean? I mean, I'm not used to it. Usually it's like always a bit touchy-feely, and journalists are always like walking that fine line, and it's so bizarre.
I mean, I guess I think of it like cops or therapists. Like, how many people are bad at their jobs? How many people are not respecting the ethics of their profession? Turns out that happens in journalism too.
Have you ever worked anywhere that there's been like some sort of ethical guideline? Like the way that, because I've sort of picked up on this kind of stuff, I think, out of like life, you know, because obviously my parents, how they raised me, like things that I understand that are good or bad, that sort of stuff. But there's never been, obviously there's been certain things that have been taught, you know, and like certain areas of writing, like attribution or stuff like that. But have you ever been in anywhere where they've had like some sort of guideline or stringent guideline or things like that?
I mean, most publications I've worked for have had ethical guidelines that are actually specific to that publication. Right. You know, for example, Forbes strongly discourages anonymous sourcing. It's not impossible, but you have to jump through extra hoops in order to do so. That's not normal in another publication that I've worked for. But in some publications I've worked for, you have to disclose what off the record means to your source. Like, you have to inform them, because like a cop reading you your rights, like a lot of people don't know. So basically every publication I've worked for has had like certain like rules of the road that relate to journalism ethics for that specific publication. And part of your onboarding process is to figure that out and then apply that to the way that you work.
Do you think that we do a good job in crypto media of following guidelines?
Well, I mean, like, what is crypto media, right? Like, I think like The Defined does a pretty good job. I think a lot of CoinDesk reporters do a good job. But even within publications that have guidelines, not everyone is following them the exact same way. And there are definitely times that they slip at all publications. I think the sign of like a good outlet is not necessarily that mistakes are never made. It's how the outlet responds when a mistake is made. So, I mean, are we as an industry doing great? There's a lot of room for improvement. No.
Not at all.
Not at all. But there are individuals who are really trying, and I have great respect for that.
What do you think we are doing great?
What are we doing great? I do think that there has been a lot of intentionality around covering stories in developing nations. You could argue that there's a little bit of a white savior complex there, and I think there's some validity to that. However, I think if you go to like a regular or like mainstream tech publication, or even like a fashion publication or like a food magazine, it's much more rare to have stories coming out of the developing world. So it's something that's at least sometimes done right to have a more global perspective on an industry.
Yeah. It's funny because I feel we're very US focused. And
Yeah.
like that's one of the things that I think that we need to like drastically improve.
Okay.
Like being from Latin America as well. And thankfully Gami is from Chile, and so she's also interested in Latin American stories. And I remember when I was at Decrypt, Stacey Elliott, she was also like, you can pitch me more stuff about Latin America, I'm interested. But then at the end of the day, it's very US focused and then like small satellites.
But I can say, as somebody who used to be an international correspondent, like I've never had any crypto publication tell me like, we're not interested in that international story.
Right.
Like if you do a good job, you can get that story placed. While 110% all the time, I would have publications tell me, we're really only interested in US topics. So I think that crypto is maybe a little bit better in that regard, although there's room for improvement for sure.
What do you think that, like, this is a question that I ask myself a lot. What do you think that we can learn from like traditional media? Because I think there's much, but there's a lot of problems obviously with traditional media, as with everything. But yeah, what do you think that are there a couple things that immediately come to mind that you're like, I wish we were doing more of that, or why can't we be?
So everything's individual, right? Like what I'm about to say will directly conflict with like Taylor Lorenz, who is a traditional journalist, although covers internet culture. So I guess in some ways, crypto adjacent. In traditional media, you do not feud with your sources on Twitter. Like, that is just not a thing you are allowed to do and keep your job.
Yeah, for us, that's like the first rule of what you should do.
I mean, drumming up excitement for your coverage and sometimes participating in online feuds is very much a part of the crypto media culture. I've been guilty of it as much as anyone else, but exactly because of that, like that was in violation of my traditionalist training, and I've very much gone back to like let them say what they're going to say. It does not serve me as a journalist to engage in online feuds for literally any reason.
Yeah. I've asked this question to a lot of people that have been both around here, like in the press room, but also on this show. And it's, what do you think about the over-reliance of Twitter as like a source? Because sometimes people are like, Twitter is the source, whereas like that's where the news comes from. And I know that, well, it doesn't make sense on one hand, but then at the other time, it's reality. Like we do get a lot of our information sources, like things break on Twitter. How do you view it? Do you think that, like, would you like, are there any other channels, for example, that you might use or that you've thought about that can like try to reduce the reliance on Twitter?
I think Reddit is really underutilized amongst journalists in this industry. There's a lot of great communities on Reddit. I think that Telegram is an amazing tool. And in particular, when I'm reporting on the developing world, there are great groups of, Lebanese or Nigerian or Cuban cryptocurrency traders who are talking about like their grassroots markets. And I think that's really fascinating. And especially, if you speak Spanish, and like there's different groups that you can join where you're going to learn about what's happening in a specific country. Like you can be in Chile and learning about what's going on in Venezuela very easily just by joining a Telegram group. The over-reliance on Twitter, it can be really dangerous for your career. Any of us who have worked in media for a long time might remember in 2015, the big pivot to video phase in which most publications at that time were relying on Facebook and other social media platforms for their traffic. And then Facebook decided to change its policy and entire companies collapsed. So I think the lesson from that is relying on one particular platform, whether it's for your sourcing or for your traffic or your brand building, it means that they can destroy your career and you have nothing to do about it. So I don't think the journalists should rely only on Twitter. They should be deliberately trying to build their brand and their contacts and their skill set for search. Twitter is just really great for search. On YouTube, on like really just like, I don't care. I don't care if it's Tumblr. I don't care. Just like find other platforms that you can use because you never want to be reliant on just one platform.
Do you tell that to a lot of the people? Like, how does it work inside, for example, Forbes now? And I know that you guys work with a lot of freelancers.
Yeah.
Do you have also like on staff, a team of on staff journalists as well?
Yeah.
But anybody can still pitch stories for Forbes if they want to, or is it only...
So there's the staff journalists, and then there's the contributor model, which is the freelancers you're referring to. There are not really freelancers that are writing for Forbes.
Right.
There are some contract workers who come on for, say, like a special project. But if you're as a freelancer trying to pitch a story to a Forbes editor, you won't have any success. You either join the contributor network of freelancers, which has like a very specific expectation of monthly output. You don't do one-offs. And then there's the staff journalists. And PR people do pitch the staff journalists, although I'll say that it's extremely limited and selected because staff journalists also have monthly projects, including the print magazine, that they have to pay attention to.
What do you think about PR? Like PR agencies? Because I feel like it's like our industry is riddled with them everywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I said, I got into journalism through crypto, so I don't have experience in other industries where I might have interacted with other PR agencies. So I don't know if the amount that exists is normal, if the amount of pitches that we receive is normal.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah.
So I would say that across all the different beats that I work in, because I still do sometimes, like as an editor, I also edit freelancers that are related to politics, public policy, corporate strategy, things outside of crypto as well. And I can say that across the board, I think that the lines between journalism and PR have blurred over the past decade. I do think in crypto, for every like one journalist, there's probably like 7 PR people who are clamoring to try and get that journalist attention. And then, of course, there's, there are sources who have not hired a PR firm who are very much worth talking to. So for journalists, they're like constantly overwhelmed by potential story ideas and demand, frankly, from their bosses.
Yeah.
Hitting certain goals. I guess the answer to your question is like, there's a lot in crypto. I don't see that as abnormal.
Okay.
If you were in covering fashion, for example, you'd see a similar amount of PR. But I think what's different is that there are so few journalists that are good at covering crypto that it, in a lot of cases, would serve the PR folks better rather than swarming on the few that exist to try and encourage their clients to develop direct brand relationships with their customers, which is also a part of PR, and I think is something that is really misunderstood. When people think PR, they think only pitching a journalist, but PR is also just all kinds of brand communications. And I think that companies would be much better served by focusing on brand communications and then only coming to a journalist when they have a story that is relevant to that person's beat, as opposed to just constantly trying to get, their software system update as a story.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's the spray and pray approach is wild. And sometimes I feel like you get, like sometimes I feel they don't even say my name. They're like, hey, and then they just send out this like dry memo of whatever it is they want. It's wild. But when you think about journalists in crypto, what do you think that we're particularly good at?
I think journalists in crypto are really savvy when it comes to research because there are a lot fewer studies and academic experts that you can just rely on. Like, oh, well, the UN says this and so at Columbia says that. So boom, there's my story. You can't do that in crypto. You have to find some kind of credible expertise outside of the traditional hierarchies, and you have to find some kind of data outside of well-respected and that's not true anymore, I guess. There are quite a few studies, like Cambridge has a center that does really great studies on cryptocurrency mining, for example. But they're just few and far between. So you have to be better at research in order to be a good crypto journalist.
And the opposite question, what do you think we're particularly bad at as journalists?
Being skeptical without being accusatory.
Okay.
Like, there are definitely articles and people who, we accuse of being scammers. But there's a lot of things that you can be skeptical of without calling someone a criminal. And if somebody comes to you and claims that their blockchain does XYZ thing, maybe get back to the concept of nouns and like, are you running a blockchain? At what point is your network having participation from external parties? Like, let's get back to like, what are we reporting on here, and not just parroting what somebody says or saying like, because they say this, then they're issuing an unregistered security. Like, that's something for our court to decide. Our decision is just about like, who are the people involved and what's going on with them? Where's the money coming from?
Yeah, I wonder if that's like a downstream effect of like the constant Twitter feuds.
Yeah.
And so like we're just so used to accusing each other and fighting and all the time that at the end of the day, it's like that's going to come out one way or another in their stories.
I definitely think that reducing the amount of time or controlling the amount of time you spend on Twitter, like you should be there for a particular purpose. That can be socializing, that can be learning and reading. But just like being like, okay, I'm only going to do that for this amount of time can be really good for your mental health.
Yeah.
You'll find yourself going down this rabbit hole and you're like, I'm angry. I don't even know why I'm angry.
Yeah, I feel like there's been a couple of times where I've been like slipping because I used to not use social media at all. And then obviously, got into crypto, got into journalism, and I had to go down that path.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's been a few times where I feel like the slippage is coming and then I'm like, all right, pull back and just like reconnect with the real world and go and do something else.
Yeah, for sure.
You're one of the co-founders along with Cami, and I don't know if anybody else for I don't know how you say it.
Des Femmes?
Des Femmes.
Yeah.
What was the goal? What is the goal? What is Des Femmes doing nowadays?
So the idea came from Cami. It came from a conversation we were having after an ACGR event about how much we wanted to see more content that was specifically for women who work in tech or interested in tech. And I bet that this was a really great idea, but it was just not going to be economically feasible. And she disagreed. And so she set up a crowdfunding page using Cuen. And within a week, called me up and we had 40 grand worth of crypto. Nice. And I was like, oh no, okay, so I've made this bet and now we have the money.
And now we have to do something.
Now something must be done. Yeah. So we created a small organization that would help us like report taxes and deal with all the things that come with allocating funds, especially when what we wanted was to get a print product into a mainstream store. That was our first goal. And so distributors at Barnes & Noble are not going to work with you in Ethereum. You have to have contracts and all these things. So we created an entity to do that. And we gathered people who had participated in the crowdfunding campaign. We tweeted. We reached out to women that we knew in the industry. We're like, hey, do you want to make a magazine? And we did, and we got into Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. We were distributed in hundreds of stores across both Canada and the U.S., and even some airports in Europe.
Cool.
And we did that for 2 years. And I don't think even for a lot of traditional companies, print products are the big money maker. It's mostly advertising. And we didn't necessarily want to go the route of raising VC funds or really focusing our time fully on acquiring advertisers. So we discontinued the print product, although we definitely still have some that we give to people who are involved in the programs, and started doing what people were demanding a lot of during the pandemic, because that was roughly the time this happened, which was ways to connect with other human beings. So we still do have an online newsletter. The woman who writes it is named Sterling. She was one of the editors who contributed to the magazine. And we do a lot of online and sometimes in-person programs. We're going to have a meetup actually later today. A bunch of people are in town for the Nashville conference. We had a leadership training program in Paris last year that coincided with the conference for women investors. We had an online program for financial education, just financial literacy, and understanding even with crypto as a part of that, but like the bigger story in terms of how it is we make our decisions in our career. And we have a program coming up later this year, also for working moms, and help them in terms of finding work-life balance and making financial decisions, like how do you include finances as part of your birth plan? Like, so there's a lot of women who work in crypto. How many of them are promoted to senior leadership? And that's true in media. That's true in tech.
Yeah.
True, across industries. So I actually don't think that crypto is worse than other industries at all. I just think that we're a very easy target because there's a lot less decorum, I think, around the way that people celebrate cryptocurrency and express themselves related to it. So it's easy to mock. I do think that we're a small percentage, but I don't think that necessarily is different than any other industry when we're talking about a lot of money involved, right? Like how many women are involved in banking at the senior leadership level?
I can't imagine many.
Yeah.
What would you, how can we like improve those numbers? Or is it just like a natural progression of, giving women more opportunity or equal pay, or just inviting to a conference, trying to level out the amount of women that you invite?
Yeah.
Like, what have you thought about what we can be doing?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, equal pay is a big one. I think that, especially in the crypto industry, this is true for all humans, not only women, but there's this idea that like you have to like pay your dues with free labor in order to be giving back to the community. We need to do away with that for anybody who does not come from an economic background where free labor is an option for them.
Yeah.
So equal pay is a great thing, and compensating non-technical work, so work related to education, to product management, to organization, because a lot of times women have less computer science education. Investing in computer science education for women is a great one. But if you're an employer or you work in a company, just crusading for things like parental leave for both genders actually can make a huge difference. Like, a woman is not going to take such a big hit to her career if she has a partner at home who's taking paternity leave. And not everyone chooses to become a parent. So there are other kinds of policies like that can come into play. Taking it seriously if, a woman is choosing to do IVF, or, that's a medical procedure, she could get a day off. So just thinking about like how do workplace policies make sure that this person is not being disadvantaged based on their genitalia, and how do we think about supporting the men in our workplace so that they can be there for the women in their lives, and as equal parts of their family.
Yeah, it's funny. My sister has she had a project where she was helping parents develop or have the skills for developing their kids in the first 3 years, which is when like the brain is most nimble and absorbs everything. And then she transitioned into sort of finding gender parity at home, so things that men can do to also support women in their workplaces or life balance, so it's not always the same sort of tasks at home that women do and men do, and those like traditional roles and values. And it's really interesting, and like the results are really interesting, and it's really cool to see.
It's actually really healthy for men too. I've done studies about men who are more involved in childcare and how their brains actually change. Like, they're obviously never pregnant, but they still have like positive brain development. Like, they're faster in their reactions, they're more perceptive, because you spend time with your kid and you want to be able to like keep them safe. So it's positive for men to be involved in childcare and domestic labor as well.
Yeah. This might sound like a weird question, but like women journalists and men journalists, you've been in the industry, not just crypto, but like media industry. Do you think that they have inherently different ways to approach a story, different ways to write a story? Have you noticed like a skew, and if there is something like that separates them?
Treated differently by subjects, which leads to a different approach in writing a story. Like, I can't even count for you the amount of times I've had people I'm interviewing trying to explain to me what blockchain is, like as a concept. And to which I'm like, well, I've been doing this for 6 years. One would hope that I now have the grasp of the fundamental noun. But I don't think any of my male colleagues like have to spend time on that in an interview being like, no, I know the subject we're talking about. We can just talk about the subject. So I think that might, in some ways, lead men to get to some deeper questions. But I honestly don't think like it just means it will take me longer to get to it.
Right.
I think that it's really individual. It's not necessarily that men or women write different ways. It's like they might get to their own individual style, which might be more of a storytelling. It might be more data oriented. Like, I've seen both genders do both. But it really depends on how their subjects are treating them. And that might also, beyond gender, have something to do with like their ethnic background, the way they're being treated. So I think it's very individual.
What is there anything? I mean, we've touched like sporadically on it, but what pissing you off like about the media industry? It can be also. I'm interested in the perspective on traditional media, like mainstream media. Although I don't know, like I try to call it conventional media because I feel like mainstream is just like the media is so divorced from what's mainstream nowadays that it's weird that it's called like that.
Yeah.
And like crypto media industry.
Yeah. What pisses me off? I think there's not a lot of honesty about what it is that we're offering as media broadcasters. a lot of companies are really offering advertising and entertainment as opposed to anything that's research-based, or they're mingling the two in such a way that it would be very difficult for a reader to discern what is what. And while I don't think there's anything wrong with entertainment, I love entertainment, and I don't think there's anything wrong with advertising, I think that most readers are not, they don't have enough media literacy in order to understand what they're consuming. And that's upsetting. Like, you wouldn't want to go into a doctor's office and also have, like, candy and not have it clearly labeled what is the difference between the medicine and the candy.
Right.
Like, you want to have the consumer understand what it is that they're taking in. I think in the media industry, because it is more profitable to advertise everything or to label everything as medicine, that there's not really a lot of clear distinctions between the different categories of content that are being broadcast.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I think about a lot as well, like reader literacy, and just like the lack of reader literacy, and how us as media are also complicit in a way to like the illiteracy of people. And I feel like, and I have a feeling, and I suppose there's obviously studies that will probably back this up, that it's just getting worse, except in specific pockets of the world. Like, I remember reading that, I don't know if it was Denmark or Finland or some Nordic country that was doing like digital literacy in schools. And just the idea of like learning how to discern fake news from disinformation, from misinformation. I thought that was a fascinating idea.
Yeah, it's really important, and I think it should be taught in schools.
Yeah. Is there anything that, have you ever taught in schools or wanted to teach in schools or something? I know that you've delved into the coaching side of things, but I don't know, on maybe schools or university or something like that.
Well, I've definitely spoken at events at different universities and spoken to classes. My brother teaches at a high school, and I went and talked to their journalism class and their like high school newspaper team. I'm definitely interested in more involvement with education. I think it's really important, and it's pleasurable to help people learn. Do you think it's necessary to have a journalism? I mean, obviously not, because otherwise I probably wouldn't be here. Yeah, I definitely don't.
But do you think, what are the good things that come with it? Because I know that there's like some in the ACJR that's been commented a few times, like it's helpful. It's sometimes other people are like, you can get rid of it completely if you don't need it. Like,
you don't need it. It is helpful if you went to Columbia Journalism School, because then everyone graduates and goes to work at media companies in New York.
Right.
Have a good, strong network. I think the biggest value of journalism school is networking. So if there's no reason to go to a journalism school at like a small college, it doesn't make any sense. I actually went to study journalism at a relatively small college, but it was in San Francisco. So again, I gained sources and networking opportunities in the city of San Francisco specifically. The only thing that I really take away that I learned in school was media law, which is funny because I hated that class.
That's interesting.
But it is valuable because, like, I know exactly what it is I can and can't do. You can record people in certain states, for example. In other states, you can't without informing them. I always inform people just because it makes me feel good. But I'm aware that if I go into a media context, somebody can be recording me without my consent in a certain state. Yeah. And there's also, like, what does libel mean? Like, if so often in crypto space, people are like, I'm going to sue you. Okay, what can you be sued for as a journalist? Like, you have to meet certain qualifications in order to have a case. Now, nobody likes being taken to court, even if you win. So I'm not saying that, you should flaunt it or fight. But, like, I'm very clear on what it is I'm allowed to do and not allowed to do. And my media law class is really responsible for that. So ironically, in my very expensive degree that I spent, 4 years studying, one class is what I take away, and literally everything else you can just learn on the job.
Yeah, discard it all. It's funny, I was talking to Cass Pianzi from Protos about that, because he was saying that he's a fan of traditional media, and he's like, one of the great things is that they have lawyers and they have legal teams to defend journalists in case of anything liable or anything like any criminal action that somebody wants to take against you.
So I've had legal harassment and actual court cases on more than one occasion, and in none of the cases did they have were they able to win. But it's not fun. It's not fun to have to represent your work. And so it's very important. Like, what traditional journalism organizations offer is that legal support that, like, even if I would have won those cases as a freelancer, like, the amount of cost it would have taken me to win would have been prohibitive. I would not have taken those stories on. And I don't take those stories on when I don't have an employer willing to take on that risk.
I think it's interesting because, like, in an industry like crypto, it feels bizarre that you don't see that many illegal, I mean, at least I have it, like, legal action against journalists, at least to a...
It's not looking then. There's a lot.
Is there a lot?
There's a lot.
Whoa.
And it's more than any other beat I've ever covered. More than politics, more than the sex industry. I mean, sex industry, you don't really get sued that much at all. But yeah, it's a lot.
Whoa. And like for anything then? Or is it like big? How come we don't see it? Like I've never seen it. Or
well, I mean, if you Google Binance is threatened to sue journalists before, that's just one example.
Right.
You don't talk about it because your lawyer tells you not to talk about it. So you don't see journalists running around complaining about the threats that they receive. Yeah, if you're making public statements about it, it's something they can use against you. So if somebody starts threatening you, even if they don't say that they're doing it in private, and then in public they start doing other things to try and get you to react, if you have a good lawyer, they've advised you to be silent.
Right. I suppose Forbes has a legal team then that supports it.
Forbes does have a legal team. I can happily say I've never been involved in any of the legal actions related to Forbes.
What's the mission behind Forbes? Because Forbes is a
trade publication.
Yeah, I know. It's like a trade finance publication that added on this sort of digital assets arm. So I'm just curious about...
Well, I definitely can't speak for my employer overall. Forbes is a huge company and it's 100 years old. There's not like... I wouldn't say there's like a digital assets arm, although there is a particular division of the company that deals with the crypto industry. It's a financial media company. So crypto is money. There's definitely departments that deal with digital assets.
How important do you think it is for a journalist to, this is like tying back to the idea of a media company and what sort of role journalists are playing. And I think that as the sort of, I'm a writer and I've always been a writer. And so I think that's definitely like my strong suit. But I feel like people are reading always a little bit less. Yeah. People are spending less time on the articles themselves. Yes. How important is it for a journalist to still obviously it's a skill that you have to have, but is it the ultimate skill to have as a journalist? Or is it...
I think it these days is the ultimate skill to have as a journalist other than performing. And I'm very bad at that, so you don't necessarily have to skip that.
Do you think that you're good at asking questions? Like when you're interviewing sources or researching things?
I wish I was an articulate and polished person. I'm just not.
This podcast says the contrary to that.
I mean, I know what questions to ask because I've done the research before my interview.
Right.
It's not something that inherently comes to me that I'm better at asking questions than anyone else.
What was it like? When you were an international correspondent, would you get a lot of stuff in field, like on site, stuff like that? Did you enjoy that more than sitting behind and
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Do you think that? Well, I guess crypto is a very digital first, second, and third industry, so it might be a bit tough to get to that sort of stage.
You can. I've actually done it plenty. It just isn't economic.
Okay.
It's very expensive to go to different places physically. And get a nice big camera. So it's certainly more pleasurable, but this is my profession, and so I do a lot of calls online. Right.
I've asked this question to a lot of people, mostly editors actually, and it's the idea of speed in journalism and breaking stories and stuff like that. And I remember talking to Dan Roberts, who is he's like, nah, man, speed is the most important thing, and I don't care what anybody else has to say about it.
I understand why he believes that.
What do you think about the idea of day after news or like day after analysis. So something happens.
I think it's really valuable.
But do you still think that the focus should be on speed, or is the more interesting news cycle one that's sort of digested it, gotten sources, sort of fleshed out a little bit?
Well, I think every editor needs to make decisions based on the economic needs of their company. I personally am in a very lucky position where although speed is relevant and important, I can value quality, and speed and quality are inherently not conducive to going together. So your quality will increase the more time you have spent on a piece. So I encourage people to take as much time as they need to do it right. I've definitely been in situations where the company prioritizes speed, and then you do what you can with what you are ordered to do.
Yeah, it's I find that's one of the things that I think frustrates me a lot. Like the whole like breaking news, because at the end of the day, you're sort of, it's a self-fulfilling, it's like a vicious circle, you know?
Yes.
Like you don't want to be a part of it, but then, and you don't want to be part of that like churn of news, but you still want to be first.
Yeah.
And you still want to break the story, and you still want to go, you know, be the one that's SEO first and all that sort of stuff. I'm always baffled by it because, and I think that there is a sort of, and I don't know if you agree, that there's a sort of moving away from that. I think it's getting exacerbated at the extremes, maybe. Like there's one.
I don't know if there's a moving away from that, at least not at large media corporations. Maybe at niche publications where they realize they can never compete with the on speed, so they have to compete on quality. But I don't think that there's a move away from that for larger corporations.
Do you think it's still like profitable? Do you think that you can have a media company that's profitable, that's only doing like longer?
I don't know if you can have a media company that's profitable even if you're first. I think that media companies across the board are really needing to return to the revenue model and ask some hard questions.
What do you think is the best revenue model, if there is one? Or like,
I have no idea.
What do you think about the like advertising model, subscription model? Like I'm a fan of subscription model, but I know that it's really tough and it's
not functional at scale.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer, to be honest. I mean, I know like you can make money, and I think that advertising and brand content are the ways that we know how to make the most money right now. But I don't think any of these have the kind of exponential growth that is now expected in our economy. Like journalism as a concept was never made for exponential growth of profit.
Yeah.
You could have profit, but can you have profit that never stops growing? I don't know if you can have that. Maybe. If so, it's with a revenue model they haven't really explored yet.
So I guess like journalism is the antithesis to capitalism, just because you can't endlessly grow it. It's not like
you can't endlessly grow fact checking efficiency. Like you can increase it to a certain point, but at a certain point, it is literally a human being who is going over things line by line, and that is time consuming, and time is expensive in terms of labor.
Have you thought at all about like the role that AI might play in the journalism space?
Yeah. Who hasn't that works in this industry? And I'm super excited about what could be and very frustrated at the fact that it doesn't seem to be how it is people want to apply it. AI is great at finding a missing comma.
Yeah.
AI is great at finding typos and passive voice. There's a lot of editing that we can just do away with and focus on editing that deals with substance. That's generally not how publications are using it. What they are using it for is sometimes just things that improve SEO, which is fine. I don't see anything wrong with that. And sometimes things that entirely do away with quality as a concept. So that's less ideal. I think that there's a lot of potential with AI, and I hope that people start exploring what it's good at.
Yeah, I ask because I feel like AI is being used to cover the stories that journalists don't have time to cover. And so you've got like...
But they're not covering it. What they're doing is compiling random words, stories that journalists don't have time to cover.
Exactly. And then I'm sort of scared that eventually like this is going to... I mean,
yes,
it's going to become the form of news.
Yes. Yes. So the question becomes, if you want to make a living in this industry, what can you do that a computer cannot do? And who is willing to value that? Because the reason that it's still profitable to post word salad is because advertisers don't ask about the quality of an article when their ad goes into it. They just care about the views. So if you have a solid headline and people click on it and click out 5 seconds later, an advertiser still pays the same amount as if they'd stayed on it for the full 2 minutes of reading. So the question becomes like, how do you find companies that are valuing the relationship between content and reader, and broadcaster and reader, and how do you acquire skills that a computer cannot easily mimic, even if it cannot successfully execute it?
Yeah, do you think that I was talking to Phil Gomez about this. He was saying like journalism is always 5 years away from dying.
Yeah.
Like,
yes. Yes, I agree with that.
You agree?
Yeah.
But what's like the biggest shift that you think is going to happen moving forward, like in the journalism industry?
I mean, nothing positive, unfortunately. I still think that the craft will exist. It will just be very different as an industry.
Yeah, I'm fortunately like a insufferable optimist.
Good,
very
good.
Yeah, I always think that things are going to be better and are going to improve. But then at the same time, I also have like my feet on earth, and I understand those things that are just going in ways that I don't think are very beneficial to us.
Look, there was a time when anyone who wanted to go from one place to another had to have a horse. No longer is the case. There are still people who have professions related to horses. So it's not that the entire craft will go away. It's not that the profession will go away. It just may become much more difficult to make a living that way as a middle-class person.
Right. This has been an awesome conversation, and I always end with 2 specific questions. I'm a big reader, very, very voracious reader, and so I'm always interested in finding out what people are reading, books.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I love to know what you're reading, like what book you're reading at the moment, and what book do you usually, or books that you usually recommend. They can be crypto related, or they can be outside of crypto.
Yeah.
You can take it in whatever direction you want.
Okay. So I am reading right now Light Eaters, which is actually a book by a journalist about plants, and it's thrilling. I know that doesn't sound like it's thrilling.
That sounds very counterintuitive.
But I highly recommend it if you have any interest in science publications and journalism. She talks a lot about the process of publishing research related to plants and all the controversies there. And when it is, you like dig down like any industry. You dig down into the niche, you find drama. So I highly recommend Light Eaters. In terms of what books I recommend to people, I recommend a lot of books to people. I don't know. I guess it really depends on what it is they're looking for, but I'm going to go completely out of left field and recommend a poetry book.
Okay.
A Red Cherry on a White Tile Floor, which is by a Syrian poet named Maryam al-Masri. And it is just short and will make you feel all the things. And if you're, I originally found it when I was studying Arabic, and you can get it in Arabic and English side by side if you're ever looking to practice your Arabic. So I really highly recommend that to people who say, I don't like poetry. I'm like, you just haven't found a poet that suits you, and maybe it's too esoteric and lengthy and just all these things that feel distant from you. But I bet if I gave you like a tiny nugget of feeling, you would take that in and want some more. So I highly recommend Maryam al-Masri, Red Cherry on a White Tile Floor.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's the first poetry book that somebody recommended. And it's funny, because poetry rarely gets recommended.
Yeah.
You know, you always send articles or books or podcasts or stuff like that, but like you never think of, or at least I never think of, or I rarely receive somebody who's recommending a poem. So I appreciate it. Nice one. Leigh, thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Man, and